In the spring of 1940, as the formidable Nazi panzer divisions advanced across France and the German Luftwaffe asserted its dominance over European skies, a visionary 45-year-old engineer named Edgar Schmood occupied a modest office at North American Aviation in Inglewood, California. There, he meticulously drafted plans for what would ultimately become the most pivotal fighter aircraft of the Second World War. What makes this endeavor particularly remarkable is that Schmood embarked on this ambitious project entirely on his own initiative. The U.S. Army Air Corps had not commissioned the design, nor had they even hinted at a desire for a new fighter. Schmood was operating on a purely speculative and calculated risk. Failure would mean his company would absorb all development expenses, and he would likely face unemployment. Edgar Schmood's extraordinary journey, a narrative worthy of a cinematic production, was, in fact, a reality. Born in Hagen, Germany, in 1899, Schmood's early life was marked by a profound fascination with aviation, ignited by witnessing the Wright brothers' aerial demonstrations across Europe. Following the conclusion of World War I, his professional career began at Fokker in Holland, the very company responsible for constructing the legendary Red Baron's triplane. The economic upheaval of the Great Depression prompted his immigration to America in 1930, arriving with little more than his engineering blueprints and an unyielding ambition. By 1936, he had found his place at North American Aviation, a relatively modest California enterprise primarily known for producing training aircraft. This company, unlike industrial giants such as Lockheed or Boeing, was decidedly an underdog in the aviation industry. In April 1940, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation with an urgent appeal. Britain was experiencing a critical depletion of its aircraft fleet, far exceeding its manufacturing capacity, and desperately required an immediate and substantial supply of fighter planes. Their initial request was for North American to produce Curtiss P-40 Warhawks under license, a conventional and financially secure arrangement. However, company president James Dutch Kindleberger and Schmood perceived this as an unparalleled opportunity to surpass their competitors. Schmood audaciously declared to the British representatives, "We can design you a better fighter from scratch in 120 days." His proposal was met with incredulity from the British and even his own colleagues, who understood that designing a combat aircraft typically demanded years of rigorous testing, extensive wind tunnel research, and numerous prototype failures, not a mere 4 months. Unbeknownst to them, Schmood had been discreetly developing advanced fighter concepts for many months, driven by an obsession with resolving a singular, pervasive challenge plaguing all contemporary fighters: range limitations. While the Spitfire excelled in close-quarters dogfights, its operational radius was severely restricted to approximately 400 miles. The P-40 offered decent range but lacked sufficient climb performance. German Bf-109s, lethal interceptors, were similarly constrained by their limited fuel capacity, tethering them closely to their airfields. Every air force globally confronted this harsh compromise. One could construct either a nimble fighter or a long-range fighter, but the laws of physics seemingly precluded both. Yet, Schmood firmly believed that physics could be circumvented through an innovative wing design. Faced with growing desperation and dwindling alternatives, the British signed the contract on May 29, 1940, granting Schmood 120 days to deliver the first prototype. It was an undertaking widely regarded as impossible. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please also leave a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Schmood swiftly assembled a dedicated team of 150 engineers and draftsmen, who then worked tirelessly in continuous 24-hour shifts, operating in rotating crews. His undisclosed advantage was not merely an abundance of caffeine or sheer resolve. It was the invaluable data provided by NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. This organization had been meticulously testing a revolutionary wing profile known as a laminar flow airfoil. Schmood was prepared to stake his entire professional career on the premise that this innovative design would prove effective, not merely in a controlled wind tunnel environment, but under the perilous conditions of combat at speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour, with enemy fire as an ever-present threat. On October 26, 1940, a mere 178 days after the British contract was formalized, test pilot Vance Breeze expertly lifted the inaugural NA-73X prototype from the runway at Mines Field in Los Angeles. The aircraft evinced an immediate sensation of lightness, responsiveness, and an almost eager disposition. Breeze skillfully maneuvered it through a series of rolls and climbs, and upon landing, he delivered the kind of feedback that engineers universally aspire to hear. "This thing handles like a sports car." Within a few weeks, the British officially christened the aircraft the Mustang, and the initial reports appeared to corroborate Schmood's seemingly impossible gamble. The plane exhibited remarkable speed, achieving 390 miles per hour in level flight, a velocity that surpassed nearly every other aircraft in the sky at the time. It was characterized by its smooth operation and inherent stability. However, when pilots subsequently took the Mustang to combat altitudes, the performance dramatically deteriorated. The critical flaw became brutally apparent in early 1942, as Royal Air Force squadrons began to integrate their newly acquired Mustangs. Below an altitude of 15,000 feet, the aircraft performed magnificently. RAF pilots effectively deployed them for ground attack and reconnaissance missions, executing devastating strafing runs against German supply convoys in France. Yet, the moment the aircraft ascended above 15,000 feet, the Mustang underwent a stark transformation, evolving from a high-performance thoroughbred into a struggling cart horse. Its engine began to labor audibly, and its acceleration capabilities vanished. In a high-altitude dogfight against a formidable Messerschmitt Bf-109 or Focke-Wulf FW-190, the Mustang became an easy target, effectively a sitting duck. Pilots began to disparagingly refer to it as a low-altitude sports car trapped in a high-altitude war. The primary culprit was identified as the Allison V1710 engine, a meticulously engineered piece of American machinery that possessed one critical, fatal flaw: its reliance on a single-stage, single-speed supercharger. To elucidate this without delving into a comprehensive engineering discourse, it is crucial to understand that at high altitudes, the air becomes considerably thinner, meaning there is less oxygen available for the engine to efficiently combust. A supercharger functions essentially as an air compressor, designed to force a greater volume of oxygen into the engine cylinders. The Allison supercharger performed adequately at sea level and moderate altitudes, consistently delivering a respectable 1,150 horsepower. However, above 15,000 feet, the typical operational ceiling for most European air combat engagements, this particular supercharger proved incapable of compressing a sufficient amount of air. Consequently, the engine's power output plummeted to approximately 900 horsepower. In stark contrast, German fighter aircraft, equipped with sophisticated two-stage superchargers, were able to sustain their full power output up to 25,000 feet. In the context of a dogfight, horsepower directly translates into tactical advantages: superior speed, enhanced climb rate, and the crucial ability to either evade an adversary or relentlessly pursue one. The Mustang, despite its beautifully refined aerodynamics, simply lacked the necessary power to leverage these advantages where it mattered most. American pilots discovered this inherent limitation through harsh experience. The U.S. Army Air Forces initially relegated their P-51s to low-level reconnaissance assignments, a role essentially identical to that which the RAF had reluctantly adopted. Photo reconnaissance Mustangs would streak across enemy territory at treetop altitudes, relying on their speed and the element of surprise to avoid engagement with enemy fighters rather than confronting them directly. This was a profoundly humiliating fate for an aircraft that had initially promised so much. Engineers at Wright Field in Ohio conducted numerous tests, meticulously fine-tuning fuel mixtures and adjusting supercharger gearing. Yet, it became evident that one cannot extract performance that simply does not exist within the engine's fundamental design. The Allison engine was unequivocally not engineered for the demands of high-altitude combat. North American Aviation's brilliantly conceived airframe was being severely hampered by an inadequately powerful core. By mid-1942, the Mustang program appeared to be an exorbitantly expensive miscalculation. The Army had placed orders for thousands of these aircraft. However, what utility did a fighter possess if it could not effectively operate at the altitudes where bomber formations were most vulnerable? B-17 flying fortresses were enduring catastrophic losses over Germany, with dozens of aircraft being destroyed per mission, primarily because their fighter escorts, the P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings, were compelled to abandon their charges before reaching deep into enemy territory. The bombers would then proceed alone, becoming easy prey for Luftwaffe fighters, which would mercilessly tear into them like wolves attacking sheep. Everyone involved in the war effort understood that the definitive solution was a long-range, high-altitude escort fighter. The Mustang undeniably possessed the requisite range and an exceptional airframe, but it conspicuously lacked the necessary altitude performance. Schmood's revolutionary design was, tragically, succumbing to oxygen deprivation. The pivotal solution emerged from an unexpected quarter. A British test pilot named Ronald Harker, who happened to be visiting North American Aviation's Inglewood factory in April 1942. Harker, an experienced pilot for Rolls-Royce, was accustomed to flying Spitfires, and was deeply involved in testing various engine and performance modifications. When he took the controls of a Mustang for a demonstration flight, he immediately grasped what American engineers had somehow overlooked. He recognized the airframe as extraordinary, superior to any aircraft he had ever piloted, yet it was quite literally gasping for air at altitude. The moment he landed, Harker dispatched a concise telegram to Rolls-Royce headquarters in Derby, England. This message, consisting of just 5 words, would irrevocably alter the course of the war. Flight testing Mustang needs Merlin engine. The Rolls-Royce Merlin was far more than just another engine. It was the legendary power plant that had propelled Spitfires and Lancaster bombers to iconic status. Crucially, it incorporated a sophisticated 2-stage, 2-speed supercharger system that effectively maintained power output up to an altitude of 30,000 feet. The engineering behind this system was intricate. The initial supercharger stage compressed the incoming air, and an intercooler then reduced its temperature to enhance density. Subsequently, the second stage compressed the air once more before forcibly injecting it into the engine cylinders. This advanced configuration yielded an impressive 1,520 horsepower at 20,000 feet, nearly double the power the Allison engine could muster at that same altitude. However, replacing an aircraft engine is a far more complex undertaking than simply swapping a car battery. The Merlin was heavier, its mounting points were different, and it necessitated a complete redesign of the engine mounts, cooling systems, and propeller configurations. Rolls-Royce, recognizing the urgency and potential, did not await American approval. By October 1942, they had procured a Mustang from RAF inventory and, at their Hucknall facility, ingeniously integrated a Merlin 61 engine into its airframe. The maiden test flight occurred on October 13, 1942, with Rolls-Royce test pilot Captain Ronnie Shepard at the controls. Shepard ascended to 20,000 feet, anticipating the Mustang's usual sluggish response. Instead, the aircraft surged forward, as if it had been liberated from its constraints. He continued to push it to 25,000 feet, noting its continued strong climb performance. Even at 30,000 feet, the engine was still robustly delivering power. When he executed a dive and opened the throttle, the airspeed indicator registered an astonishing 433 miles per hour. Shepard landed and submitted a report that utilized terms such as phenomenal and revolutionary. The British immediately designated this modified aircraft the Mustang X and assigned it top priority status. Back in the United States, North American Aviation and the Army Air Forces were working feverishly to bridge the technological gap. Whispers had circulated regarding the remarkable outcomes of the British Merlin engine trials, and by November of 1942, Wright Field had received performance data that seemed almost fantastical. The figures indicated an astonishing 50 miles per hour surge in speed, and an elevation of the service ceiling from 31,000 feet to an unprecedented 41,900 feet. Understandably, some engineers harbored suspicions of measurement inaccuracies, deeming such improvements implausible. However, these doubts were swiftly dispelled when the inaugural American-built Merlin-powered Mustang, designated XP-51B, soared into the skies on November 30, 1942, from Inglewood. Test pilot Bob Chilton, after putting the aircraft through its rigorous paces, radioed back to base with an excitement that was barely contained. "This thing climbs like a homesick angel," he exclaimed. The metamorphosis was absolute and profound. The very airframe that had previously struggled to operate effectively above 15,000 feet now effortlessly dominated at 25,000 feet, and could engage in combat with formidable efficacy at 35,000 feet. Concurrently, Packard Motor Company in Detroit commenced the licensed production of Merlin engines, specifically the Packard V1650-3, which was essentially an American-manufactured Merlin with modified tooling engineered for extensive mass production. By the nascent months of 1943, P-51B Mustangs, equipped with these powerful Merlin engines, were steadily emerging from assembly lines at both the Inglewood facility and a newly established factory in Dallas, Texas. The Mustangs powered by the original Allison engine were, without fanfare, reassigned to roles primarily involving ground attack and reconnaissance missions. The real Mustang, the definitive version destined to escort strategic bombers on their perilous journeys to Berlin and back, had finally materialized. Edgar Schmood's ingenious airframe had at last discovered its proper heart, and the German Luftwaffe was on the cusp of a stark revelation regarding the devastating capabilities of 1,500 horsepower combined with revolutionary laminar flow wings in the hands of resolute and skilled pilots. Now, let us delve into the veritable genius that rendered Schmood's design truly groundbreaking: the wing itself. This is often the point where the attention of many individuals tends to wane, as engineers begin to articulate complex concepts involving terms like boundary layer and Reynolds numbers. Yet, it is imperative to remain engaged, for this particular innovation represents the fundamental distinction between a merely capable fighter aircraft and one that achieves legendary status. In essence, every aircraft wing, as it slices through the air, inevitably drags air molecules along its surface. Under conventional designs, this interaction typically generates turbulent airflow. One might visualize this as a chaotic maelstrom of tiny whirlpools and eddies swirling unpredictably over the wing's expanse. Such turbulent air is the progenitor of drag, and drag, in turn, signifies that an aircraft is expending valuable fuel simply to overcome the inherent resistance of the air itself, rather than propelling itself forward efficiently. Schmood's paramount objective was to eradicate as much of this detrimental turbulence as humanly possible, thereby unlocking unprecedented levels of aerodynamic efficiency. After 2 or 3 paragraphs, ask us to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. This monumental challenge was met by the introduction of the NACA 45-100 series laminar flow airfoil, a revolutionary design meticulously developed by the brilliant engineer Eastman Jacobs at the Langley Research Center in Virginia during the latter half of the 1930s. Jacobs had dedicated years to intensive wind tunnel experimentation, assiduously studying the intricate dynamics of how air traverses wing surfaces. Through his exhaustive research, he unearthed a discovery that was profoundly counterintuitive to the prevailing aerodynamic wisdom of the era. Most aircraft wings designed in the 1930s featured their thickest point positioned approximately 25 to 30% aft of the leading edge. Jacobs, however, boldly relocated this point of maximum thickness much further back, to 45%, effectively almost halfway along the wing's chord. This seemingly subtle alteration instigated a distinctly different pressure gradient across the wing, which had the astonishing effect of maintaining smooth, laminar airflow. This meant that the air molecules flowed in highly organized, parallel layers rather than descending into chaotic turbulence, and crucially, this laminar state was preserved over a significantly greater portion of the wing's surface. The quantitative results were nothing short of breathtaking. Extensive wind tunnel tests unequivocally demonstrated that wings incorporating laminar flow technology could achieve a reduction in drag of between 30 to 40% when compared to conventional airfoils, particularly at optimal cruise speeds. A 30% decrease in drag translates directly into the ability to traverse the same distance using considerably less fuel, or alternatively, to carry a greater fuel load and consequently extend the aircraft's operational range dramatically. However, and this was an absolutely critical caveat, the efficacy of laminar flow was entirely contingent upon the wing surface being impeccably smooth. We are speaking here of imperfections measured in mere thousandths of an inch. Even a solitary rivet head protruding slightly, a splattered insect, or indeed, imperfectly applied paint could abruptly disrupt the delicate laminar flow, causing it to transition into turbulent flow and thereby completely nullifying the hard-won aerodynamic advantage. Schmood's commitment to manufacturing tolerances bordered on what many would have considered utterly unfeasible for the mass production demands of 1940. North American aviation, under his relentless insistence, pioneered and perfected flush riveting techniques, ensuring that rivet heads sat perfectly level with the wing's skin, rather than creating any minuscule protrusions. They employed sophisticated jigs and fixtures that secured wing panels with an astounding precision, maintaining tolerances of plus or minus 0.005 inches. Skilled workers meticulously hand-sanded wing surfaces and applied multiple coats of primer and paint, carefully wet sanding between each application until the surface achieved a flawless, glass-like smoothness. Quality inspectors were empowered to reject wings that other aircraft manufacturers would have readily deemed perfectly acceptable. This stringent commitment to perfection undeniably added both time and cost to the production process, but the operational results emphatically justified every painstaking effort. The P-51's internal fuel capacity stood at a robust 269 gallons, which was subsequently augmented to 489 gallons with the addition of external drop tanks. This impressive capacity translated into an effective combat radius of an unprecedented 750 miles, meaning the Mustang possessed the capability to fly 750 miles, engage in combat for a substantial 20 minutes, and then safely return to its base. To put this into perspective, consider a contemporary Spitfire Mark IX, which carried merely 85 gallons of internal fuel and possessed a combat radius of barely 400 miles, or a P-47 Thunderbolt, with its 305 gallons, achieving a combat radius of 475 miles. The Mustang was not merely an incremental improvement, it occupied an entirely different operational category. And herein lay the truly remarkable aspect of its design. Because the laminar flow wing was so exceptionally efficient at cruise speeds, the Mustang paradoxically achieved greater range by actually flying faster. At an optimal cruise speed of 280 miles per hour, it consumed fuel with such remarkable efficiency that the simple addition of external drop tanks transformed it into an unparalleled strategic weapon. Bomber crews, for the very first time in the relentless air war over Europe, began affectionately referring to Mustangs as their little friends because these little friends could, at last, remain with them not only all the way to the distant target, but also provide steadfast protection on their perilous journey home. March 4, 1944. 64 P-51B Mustangs belonging to the 4th Fighter Group gracefully lifted off from Debden Airfield in England at precisely 10:15 in the morning, their wings noticeably heavy, with the substantial weight of 110-gallon drop tanks. The mission briefing had been delivered with an unvarnished bluntness. Their imperative was to escort the B-17 bombers all the way to Berlin and ensure their safe return. Berlin, the very capital of Hitler's Third Reich, represented an 1,100-mile round trip deep into the enemy's heartland, a destination where no Allied fighter had ever dared to venture. The bomber crews, with their extensive and often harrowing experiences, harbored a profound skepticism. They had, on too many previous occasions, witnessed their escort fighters perform a mournful waggle of their wings in apology before reluctantly peeling away at the German border, their dwindling fuel gauges compelling them to return home, leaving the vulnerable bombers to the mercy of the swarming Luftwaffe fighters. But this particular day, they were assured, would be fundamentally different. Lieutenant Colonel Don Blakesley, a seasoned combat veteran, who had previously flown Spitfires with distinction for the Royal Air Force before transferring to American squadrons, commanded the formation. Blakesley possessed a keen and profound understanding of the immense strategic implications inherent in this mission. If Mustangs could successfully reach Berlin, it meant the Luftwaffe would have no sanctuary left, nowhere to evade the relentless pursuit of Allied fighters. German fighters had progressively been retreating deeper into Reich territory, operating from airbases they had previously considered utterly safe from the reach of American escorts. Berlin, therefore, represented both the psychological and practical epicenter of German air defense. The underlying premise was clear. If one could effectively engage in combat over Berlin, one could effectively engage anywhere. The weather on that fateful day was typical March bleakness. Dense, oppressive clouds hung low over the English Channel, and severe icing conditions prevailed at altitude. Several Mustangs were compelled to abort their mission due to mechanical malfunctions, but the bulk of the formation pressed onward with unwavering resolve. They penetrated German airspace at a formidable altitude of 27,000 feet, their throttles carefully set back to an efficient cruise speed, meticulously conserving every precious gallon of fuel. The bomber stream, a vast and vulnerable procession, stretched for miles across the sky. 316 B-17s, their objective a critical ball-bearing factory located in Erkner, just on the outskirts of Berlin. Around 1140 near Brunswick, the first ominous signs of Luftwaffe resistance materialized. Messerschmitt Bf-109GS and Focke-Wulf FW-190, as, diving precipitously from above. Normally, at this geographical point, the Allied escorts would have long since departed, but today, the Mustangs were still resolutely present, a sight that caused the German pilots to hesitate, their ingrained years of tactical habit telling them that American fighters simply should not be operating this far east. That fleeting moment of hesitation proved to be their undoing. The Mustangs, with practiced precision, broke formation and engaged the enemy, swiftly turning inside the German fighters, leveraging their superior speed at altitude to dictate the terms of the engagement. Captain Don Gentile, a renowned ace, swiftly shot down 2 Bf-109s within a breathtaking 3 minutes, skillfully exploiting the Mustang's exceptional climb rate to gain advantageous altitude above his adversaries, and then execute devastating gravity-assisted dives. The very laminar flow wings that Edgar Schmood had so obsessively engineered allowed the Mustang to maintain precise control at speeds where other contemporary fighters would have begun buffeting and shaking violently. German pilots found themselves in the unfamiliar and alarming position of being simultaneously outrun and outclimbed. The ensuing furball, a pilot's colloquial term for a chaotic and tangled dogfight, dispersed across an expansive 50-mile stretch of German sky, yet the overarching and critical fact remained immutable. The B-17 bombers continued their inexorable flight toward Berlin, and the Mustangs remained steadfastly by their side, protecting them. At precisely 12:15, the formation entered Berlin's airspace. Immediately, the German flak batteries erupted, filling the sky with ominous black bursts of exploding anti-aircraft shells. However, the capricious weather unexpectedly favored the Allies. The cloud cover was so dense and pervasive that the anti-aircraft gunners were effectively firing blind. The B-17s released their bomb loads through the concealing clouds, guided by radar, and then swung around for the long journey home. The Mustang pilots meticulously checked their fuel gauges. They had expended the contents of their drop tanks and were now operating on internal fuel. But their calculations confirmed that the mission was still viable. The return leg would be flown at an optimal cruise speed, devoid of any unnecessary maneuvering, following the most direct routes home. By 1430, the formation was safely back over the expanse of the North Sea. By 1500 hours, the wheels of the Mustangs were gently touching down at various English airfields. The mission statistics eloquently narrated the story. 5 bombers were lost, predominantly to flak. The Luftwaffe, in their claims, reported 11 Mustangs destroyed, but actual losses amounted to 5, with 3 pilots successfully rescued. American fighters, in turn, claimed 13 German aircraft destroyed. However, the true victory was not measured solely in kill ratios. It was the profound psychological impact that resonated through the enemy ranks. Luftwaffe pilots, in sheer disbelief, radioed their controllers with incredulous reports. "American fighters over Berlin!" Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, the commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, is famously reported to have declared, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." The deeply entrenched myth of Fortress Germany had been irrevocably shattered at 27,000 feet, a triumph courtesy of Edgar Schmood's seemingly impossible wing design. Yet, merely reaching Berlin was only one half of the formidable equation. The Mustang also had to possess the inherent capability to survive the ensuing fight once it arrived. And it was precisely at this juncture that Schmood's meticulous design philosophy yielded dividends that no one had entirely anticipated. Nobody could have truly foreseen the transformation. German aviators in 1944 were far from novices. Indeed, many were seasoned aces, boasting hundreds of hours in intense aerial combat, having endured the grueling Battle of Britain and the brutal Eastern Front. Their machines were purpose-built for high-altitude interception. The Messerschmitt Bf 109G, for instance, could achieve speeds of 400 miles per hour and ascend at an impressive rate of 3,100 feet per minute. Even more formidable was the Focke-Wulf FW-190A, a robust fighter powered by a radial engine, renowned for its ability to withstand substantial damage and its unmatched roll rate. Theoretically, these German aircraft stood as equal competitors. Yet, in practical combat, the P-51D Mustang rendered these experienced German pilots seemingly amateurish. Entering service in the middle of 1944, the P-51D, distinguished by its bubble canopy offering unparalleled 360-degree visibility, reached a maximum speed of 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. While certainly swift, this speed was not dramatically superior to that of its German adversaries. The truly decisive advantage lay in its climb rate, a remarkable 3,200 feet per minute. When the Merlin engine roared at war emergency power during a dogfight, the fighter that gained altitude first invariably dictated the terms of engagement. This allowed for gravity-assisted dives to increase speed, the prerogative to choose the moment of attack, and the ability to disengage by climbing away if circumstances turned unfavorable. German pilots discovered with dismay that Mustangs could not only match their climb, but would continue ascending even as their own engines began to struggle for oxygen. The two-stage Merlin supercharger simply exhibited superior performance at 28,000 feet compared to any propulsion system the Luftwaffe could deploy. Turn performance often distinguished an effective fighter from a truly exceptional one, and here, the Mustang's innovative laminar flow wing once again proved its mettle. The Mustang possessed the remarkable ability to execute a sustained turn radius of approximately 1,200 feet at 300 miles per hour without experiencing significant energy bleed, meaning it could pivot sharply while largely preserving its velocity. In contrast, the FW-190 required a broader turning arc. The Bf-109, while capable of a tighter initial turn, rapidly shed speed, thereby leaving its pilot in a precarious and vulnerable position. American pilots quickly learned to capitalize on this inherent weakness. Should a Messerschmitt manage to get behind a Mustang, the American pilot would initiate a climbing spiral turn. The 109 would attempt to follow, both aircraft enduring perhaps 4 or 5 G-forces sufficient to cause peripheral vision gray out. However, the Mustang consistently maintained its energy state with greater efficiency. After merely 2 complete turns, the 109 would find itself struggling, slow, and exposed, while the Mustang still retained ample speed in reserve, ready to reverse the engagement and seize the advantage. Diving speed proved to be a paramount factor when combat situations deteriorated. The Mustang was officially authorized for dives up to 505 miles per hour, though pilots frequently surpassed this limit, particularly when pursuing retreating German jets. The airframe maintained its integrity remarkably well, exhibiting no wing flutter or control surface lockup. Edgar Schmood had meticulously engineered structural strength into every component through stress skin construction, a method where the aluminum skin itself bore aerodynamic loads, rather than relying solely on internal frameworks. German fighters, especially the Bf-109, often encountered difficulties with elevator flutter during high-speed dives. Consequently, their pilots learned to exercise caution, rarely pushing past 450 miles per hour. This crucial 50 miles per hour differential meant that a diving Mustang could overtake almost any fleeing adversary or evade nearly any pursuer. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please leave a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The Mustang's formidable firepower ultimately sealed its dominant position. The P-51D was equipped with 6.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, 3 mounted in each wing, carrying a total of 1,800 rounds. Each weapon discharged 800 rounds per minute, and at a typical convergence range of 300 yards, all 6 streams of bullets merged into a concentrated cone of annihilation approximately 6 feet in diameter. A mere 2-second burst could deliver roughly 160 projectiles into this lethal zone against the comparatively fragile construction of German fighters. The effect was catastrophic. Pilots frequently recounted witnessing wings fold, tail sections separate, and cockpits disintegrate under the relentless torrent of .50 caliber fire. The Mustang was not merely swifter and more agile, it possessed superior destructive capability. German aces, who had survived years of intense aerial combat, found themselves outmatched by American pilots with as little as 50 hours of combat experience, simply because the Mustang provided these newcomers with the essential tools to compensate for their relative lack of seasoned expertise. This, fundamentally, exemplifies the true hallmark of truly exceptional engineering. It renders complex tasks deceptively simple. The widespread deployment of thousands of these aircraft, flown by pilots whose primary directive was to ensure the safe return of bomber formations rather than exclusively engaging enemy fighters, exerted a momentous influence. This pivotal doctrinal shift, synergized with the Mustang's unparalleled capabilities, precipitated an unprecedented statistical massacre. Between January 1944 and May 1945, P-51 Mustangs were credibly attributed with the destruction of 4,950 enemy aircraft, a tally surpassing that of any other Allied fighter in the European theater. This impressive figure encompasses 4,131 aircraft shot down in aerial combat, and an additional 819 obliterated on the ground during strafing incursions. However, raw kill numbers alone present only a partial narrative. One must consider the profound strategic objectives that these victories accomplished. The 8th Air Force, which constituted the principal American bomber command stationed in England, suffered an average loss of 350 heavy bombers each month during the latter half of 1943. This translated to approximately 3,500 highly trained aircrew members killed or captured every 30 days, an intolerable rate by any metric. Each B-17 or B-24 carried a crew of 10, represented hundreds of thousands of dollars in manufacturing costs, and necessitated months of intensive crew training. The Luftwaffe was effectively decimating the Allied forces in an attrition war, simply by compelling unescorted bombers to navigate a gauntlet of concentrated fighters at strategic choke points along their routes to German industrial targets. In October 1943, a single raid targeting Schweinfurt resulted in the loss of 60 bombers out of 291 dispatched, a staggering 20% loss rate that threatened to cripple the entire bombing campaign within months if it persisted. The introduction of long-range P-51B escorts in December 1943 promptly altered this grim calculus. By March 1944, bomber loss rates had experienced a precipitous decline to 3.5% per mission. By June 1944, Following D-Day, when Mustang groups were executing multiple daily missions, the rate plummeted further, falling below 2%. This reduction was not indicative of a sudden deterioration in the Luftwaffe's combat prowess. Rather, German fighters found themselves compelled into an impossible predicament. They were obliged to intercept the bomber formations to prevent the extensive destruction of Reich industry, yet engaging meant piercing a formidable screen of Mustangs that could pursue them across vast distances. Luftwaffe pilots began submitting reports detailing instances where they would visually acquire bomber formations, but were unable to initiate an attack because the Mustangs consistently maintained the crucial altitude advantage. Consequently, the role of the escorts had fundamentally transformed from purely defensive operations to a proactive offensive posture. Ground attack missions unleashed a new wave of destruction. Once bomber formations were securely en route home, Mustang squadrons would descend to treetop level, actively hunting for opportunistic targets: locomotives, military trucks, vital fuel depots, and enemy aircraft parked on airfields. The potent .50 caliber guns, capable of dismantling a fighter at altitude, proved devastatingly effective against the thin-skinned structures of ground targets. German train engineers quickly learned to abandon their locomotives the moment they sighted approaching Mustangs, understanding that a single strafing pass could render a steam engine into irreparable scrap metal. Luftwaffe airfields responded by relocating aircraft into blast-proof revetments and dispersing them across numerous satellite fields. But these defensive measures only served to complicate maintenance and operational logistics. Ultimately, the Mustang compelled the entire German air defense system into a reactive, defensive stance. The cost, however, was far from insignificant. The 8th Air Force sustained losses of approximately 2,520 P-51s between 1943 and 1945, with roughly 1,300 pilots killed. This represented a loss rate of about 33% relative to enemy aircraft destroyed, an advantageous exchange ratio, but undeniably a painful one. A substantial number of these losses resulted from flak and ground fire during perilous low-level strafing runs, which constituted the most dangerous mission profile. Even a solitary rifle bullet perforating the radiator could doom a Mustang by causing coolant loss and subsequent engine failure. Nevertheless, the strategic calculus was brutal and unequivocally clear, sacrificing one highly trained fighter pilot for the destruction of 2 or 3 German fighters, coupled with the saving of dozens of bomber crew lives, was a mathematically imperative trade-off to secure victory in the war. By spring 1945, the Luftwaffe had been systematically reduced to a residual shadow force, operating intermittently with inadequate fuel reserves and staffed by novice pilots, who possessed perhaps only 30 hours of flight training. While the Mustang did not single-handedly achieve air superiority, it undeniably rendered victory inevitable and expedited its arrival by many months. The war concluded in May 1945, and the majority of wartime aircraft designs were subsequently relegated to scrapyards or museums within a few years. The future, as everyone understood, belonged to jets. The Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter had already unequivocally demonstrated the obsolescence of piston engines, even if its late introduction prevented it from altering Germany's fate. Yet, Edgar Schmood's ingenious Mustang design never truly faded gracefully into retirement. The fundamental tenets of engineering embedded within its laminar flow wing and stressed skin fuselage continued to find enduring relevance and new applications long after its final combat mission over the European theater. The unfolding narrative of its post-war life powerfully illuminates something profoundly important about truly revolutionary engineering. A truly great design possesses the inherent capacity to surpass its original intended purpose. When the Korean War erupted in June 1950, the Air Force abruptly found itself in urgent need of robust ground attack aircraft capable of operating from rudimentary forward airstrips and withstanding heavy anti-aircraft fire. Contemporary jet aircraft of that era were often unpredictable, notoriously fuel-hungry, and necessitated long, meticulously prepared concrete runways. Consequently, the F-51D Mustang, which had been redesignated when the Air Force gained independence in 1947, was swiftly recalled from storage and deployed to Korea within a matter of weeks. Pilots discovered that the aircraft excelled in ground attack missions, effectively carrying bombs, rockets, and napalm while absorbing battle damage that would have summarily downed a jet. The reliable Merlin engine and resilient airframe meant that Mustangs could operate from primitive strips situated close to the front lines. They ultimately flew an astonishing 62,607 combat sorties in Korea, sustaining losses of 351 aircraft primarily due to ground fire. This was a remarkable testament for a design that was already a full decade old. However, the most remarkable endurance of the P-51 Mustang was observed within its Foreign Service tenure. Many smaller, less affluent nations found themselves unable to procure or sustain the intricate infrastructure necessary for modern jet fighters, yet they discovered that the Mustang could be operated with impressive efficacy and surprisingly limited logistical support. A prime example is the Israeli Air Force, which deployed P-51Ds during the intense 1948 Arab-Israeli War and continued to keep these formidable aircraft in active duty until 1961. Even more extraordinarily, the Dominican Air Force maintained its Mustangs in service until 1984, representing an astounding 44 years since the very first prototype took to the skies. These were far from mere static exhibits or aircraft performing aerial acrobatics at public events. Rather, they were vital operational combat machines, diligently executing crucial border patrol and demanding counterinsurgency assignments. The straightforward reality that these air forces, often with restricted access to spare parts, could competently maintain the sophisticated Merlin engines, serves as a powerful testament to the masterful engineering and inherent robustness of the entire aircraft design. Edgar Schmood, the brilliant mind behind the Mustang, personally transitioned to subsequent challenges and innovative projects. Following the conclusion of the war, he seamlessly integrated into North American aviation's burgeoning jet programs, ultimately ascending to the pivotal role of chief designer for the iconic F-86 Sabre. This swept-wing fighter achieved unparalleled aerial supremacy, famously outmaneuvering and dominating the formidable MiG-15s during the Korean conflict. A careful examination of the F-80SIX's fundamental design philosophy reveals unmistakable traces of its Mustang lineage. A persistent emphasis on uncompromised pilot visibility, exceptionally efficient aerodynamic profiles, and extended operational range. The Sabre, while certainly not a mere Mustang retrofitted with a jet engine, nonetheless inherited the identical, almost obsessive, dedication to minimizing aerodynamic drag and maximizing structural efficiency. Schmood eventually concluded his illustrious career, retiring in 1960, and passed away in 1985, having lived long enough to personally witness his seemingly impossible design, conceived in 1940, still actively engaged in combat operations more than 4 decades later. It is indeed a rare privilege for any engineer to behold such an extraordinary and enduring legacy. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The profound technological influence of the Mustang extended far beyond its individual aircraft design. The groundbreaking NACA 45-100 laminar flow airfoil, a concept upon which Schmood courageously staked his entire professional career, became the fundamental cornerstone for extensive research into the supercritical wings now ubiquitous on contemporary airliners. Throughout the 1960s, aerospace engineers, meticulously studying the complexities of transonic flight, came to a crucial realization: the very principles of laminar flow, championed by Schmood, possess the remarkable capability to significantly delay the formation of detrimental shock waves when an aircraft operated at high subsonic speeds. Leading manufacturers swiftly integrated these vital insights. Boeing, for instance, adeptly applied these lessons to the designs of its immensely successful 737 and 747 aircraft. Similarly, Airbus utilized analogous concepts across its popular A320 family. Consequently, every instance a passenger boards a modern commercial airliner, enjoying its impressive long-range capabilities and exceptional fuel efficiency, they are, in essence, directly benefiting from the very aerodynamic principles that Edgar Schmood not only theoretically proved within the controlled environment of wind tunnels, but also demonstrated could function flawlessly in the crucible of combat, flying at 400 miles per hour with enemy fire directed squarely at the aircraft. Ultimately, the P-51 Mustang served as irrefutable proof of a profound lesson that military procurement offices, even today, frequently struggle to fully assimilate. Occasionally, the most optimal and revolutionary solutions emerge from an engineer who was not explicitly solicited, tackling a complex problem through methods entirely unforeseen, and delivering results within a time frame that initially seemed utterly implausible. Schmood's seemingly impossible 120-day deadline in 1940 culminated in the creation of an aircraft that would profoundly influence the trajectory of aerospace design for an astonishing 3 generations. This achievement transcends mere competent engineering. It embodies a singular vision, meticulously executed with unparalleled precision amidst almost unbearable pressure. Indeed, the Allied bombers were able to successfully complete their perilous missions to Berlin and return safely, largely because one determined German immigrant steadfastly refused to concede that the immutable laws of physics had already predetermined the boundaries of what was truly achievable.